Yesterday we spoke a little bit about the concept of hierarchies. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu was putting into place a hierarchy over here, which starts with the Kohanim and the Leviim and then everybody else underneath. At this point now, in chapter 2, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to introduce something else altogether. We touched upon it yesterday, the idea of camping in specific places and the idea of every tribe having their own banner, their own flag. So let's have a look over here on page 732. Vaydav Hashem Moshe v'Aaron limor ish al digloi ba'oisois leveis avoisam yachanu b'nei Yisrael mineged saviv la'oil moed yachanu. That each, what's it saying? That everyone should camp. Each, it says, ish al digloi, each person according to his banner, according to his flag. Now, we don't know anything about this. All of a sudden, flags are being introduced. We haven't come across them before. What's the idea? It says like this, the most beautiful idea. The Medrash says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu came down to bring the Torah to the Jewish people, so he came down with armies of angels accompanying him, and each group of angel had their own banner. And when the Jewish people saw that banner, so they also wanted to have something like that, something which is similar to that. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them, when they were ready to be apportioned into different groups, into different tribes, and formalized that each one should be parking, each one should camp where it's supposed to camp. So at that point, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives each one their own degel, their own flag. So far, so good, except we don't really understand what that means. What does it mean that the angels had different flags, and because the angels had flags, so we wanted to have flags too? What's the function of a flag? So the function of the flag is something which draws everybody together. It's a fascinating thing. Where I come from in England, so they have a flag called the Union Jack. The Union Jack is really comprised of 3 different flags that have been superimposed one on top of the other. So you've got the English flag, and then you've got the Scottish flag, and you've got the what's the third one? The Welsh flag. I don't know. I'm sure there's 3 of them over there. Whatever. What is fascinating is that when you've got the English coming together as a nation, so for example, you've got some kind of a sporting event, everyone's waving the Union Jack. But when England plays Scotland, for example, in football or in rugby, so then all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of English flags and you've got a whole bunch of Scottish flags waving amongst the spectators, which means the flag has some kind of a power to draw everybody together and to turn them into a smaller cohesive unit than they would be otherwise. So over here now, Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to define each tribe, because each tribe has its own particular, talent that it's going to put into the Jewish nation, and from that, each tribe is going to have its own tribal pride. That's a pretty fundamental dimension of which tribe you belong to, that you should have a sense of pride of who you are and what it is that you're putting into the Jewish nation. How is that manifested? Well, the first thing, of course, is that they camp according to the tribe. They don't intermingle anymore. But aside from that, each tribe is going to have its own banner. And that banner is going to be different. Each one is going to be different from the other. And each one is going to reflect some dimension of the concept of being alone and being a part of the whole as well. Right? Being part of that tribe, and yet the tribe is one of the 12 tribes that are going to comprise the Jewish people. Colors are very important over here. Different tribes have different colors represent different things. It's interesting, we spoke about this once a while ago, but Joseph is given by his father, according to some opinions, he's given a multicolored coat. And the reason, according to the commentaries, the reason why he's given a multicolored coat is because Joseph really represents, he's like the one who channels the energy of all of the brothers. That was what was his task was supposed to be, to channel the energy of the brothers into the right place. Which means that Joseph is not really a tribe in and of himself, but rather he's there in order to gather everything up and make sure that it's going to look the way that it's supposed to look. And that's why he gets given a coat which represents all the different colors of the different brothers, because he's really a composite of all of them.
He's a catalyst.
He's a catalyst, right. Over here, it's the same kind of an idea. We've got camps. Each one's got their own banner. Each banner is going to represent who they are. Each banner's got different shapes on it. Here, for example, if you just take a look at the footnotes over here, down at the bottom, it says that each tribal flag was the same color as its stone. And we've got 12 stones in the Kohen Gadol's ephod, in the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. Again, 12 stones, 12 colors, each one representing a different dimension. The Zohar Kodesh refers to the idea of colors having a very sort of fundamental dimension to them, a very sort of fundamental part of a person's trait. It's interesting. Ask people, most people have, for example, a favorite color. Psychologists will tell you that your favorite color is very revealing. I had a daughter when she was younger. She claimed that her favorite color was black. I'm happy to say we never had to take her to a psychologist, so we never got some kind of a insight into why a 4-year-old girl would imagine that the color black is her favorite color. I don't know, but she's moved on since then, and I imagine that today her favorite color, if you ask me, is probably gold. But that's but it's an interesting thing that colors are very, very revealing. They really are. A person's favorite color defines a certain dimension of who he is. The colors inside of the stones that were put into the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, they defined the dimensions of each tribe, the personality of the tribe. So the flag was the same color as the stone, because the flag is again another symbol of what the tribe represents. What kind of, what's called in Hebrew the koyach, what kind of energy this tribe is going to bring into the Jewish people. And the Medrash, it gives all different kinds of things. So, here, let's just read them through because they're pretty fascinating, actually. That Reuven, the tribe of Reuven, they had dudaim. What were dudaim? So, according to most translations, it's mandrakes, some kind of a plant. It was something which was given to Reuven, pick them in order to give them to his mother. There's some kind of a fertility dimension involved. She gave them to Rachel. There's a whole lesson that can be learned from the idea of the mandrakes, but it's interesting that Reuven's color is red. Red denotes a certain sense of impetuosity. Red is a very strident color. The sages say that red is the color that sticks out the most out of all of the colors is the color red. It denotes a little bit of Reuven's personality. He's a little bit impetuous. Shimon was green, and he had the city of Shechem embroidered, because if you remember that story, Shimon and Levi, between them, they went when they were 13 years old, and they decimated the city of Shechem in order to go and get their sister Dinah back. Levi was white, black, and red. White, black, and red are colors. White and black are very important colors. The Zohar Kodesh says that the Torah was given with white and black, the colors of white and black. Fire. So it's very, very important colors over here. Yehuda is sky blue with a lion. That's where the idea of, that the emblem in Yerushalayim for the municipality is a lion. That's where it comes from the tribe of Yehuda. Of course, King David established his monarchy over here. And Mitzvah Hashem, we should hope very soon to be able to see the king again re-establishing his throne over here in Yerushalayim. Yisachar was black and blue with a sun and a moon. And again, why was that? Because as it says, that they were very famous for their scholars. They were Talmidei Chachamim. They sat and they learnt, and they were able to fix the calendar so the sun and the moon appears on theirs. Zvulun was white with a ship. The reason for that is because Zvulun were very involved in commerce. Yisachar and Zvulun had a very, very interesting, a very beautiful relationship together. Each one gave what the other one was missing. So Yisachar, they were sitting and learning, so they supplied the spiritual needs to Zvulun. Zvulun, they were very successful businessmen. They supplied the physical needs to Yisachar. There was like a symbiotic relationship that existed between them. Dan was a sapphire with a snake. The snake, interestingly enough, really is a representative of all people of Shimshon, of Samson. The idea of what Shimshon managed to do and the power that he managed to destroy inside of the Philistines and the Philistine camps, that's represented by the snake. Gad was grey with a battalion of soldiers. They were considered to be very strong soldiers. Naphtali was pale red with a doe. Naphtali was very fleet. He was very fast, able to run very, very quickly. Asher was the color of flaming olive oil, because the tribe of Asher, they had most of the olive groves in Israel were in their portion. They were the one that supplies the olive oil to the temple. They were very wealthy. Yosef, the tribes were black. Ephraim had an ox. Manasseh had a re'em. A re'em is a certain kind of an animal. The ox represents Joseph himself, because Joseph is defined by the more Kabbalistic literature as being an ox. An ox is a physical animal. An ox is something which, Yosef was a very physical person, and he went out and he helped everybody. He's called Yosef HaMashbir. Before HaMashbir became a department store, it was a definition of Yosef. He supplied everything to everybody. And Binyamin was a mixture of the other colors, and he had a wolf. And those are the different colors that are there. Those are the different banners that were there. And they represent, each one represents a tribe. What is fascinating is that they're being taught how they're going to encamp. So Ish al digloi boises aveis avoisim yachnu b'nei Yisrael mineget saviv lo mo yachanu. How's it going to be? There's going to be a square, and 3 tribes are going to be on each side. How are the 3 tribes apportioned? How does it work? So the first tribe that's being mentioned, of course, is the tribe of Yehuda, because the tribe of Yehuda represents the monarchy. It has the sense of being the most important tribe. And then it tells you how many there are. Next to him is a tribe of Yisachar. That's tribe number 2. And tribe number 3 is going to be Zvulun. So we've got a very interesting constellation over here. We've got Yehuda, who represents the monarchy. We've got Yehuda, who represents the physical rulership over the Jewish people. And then we have, who else do we have? We have Yisachar, who represent the people who are sitting and learning, the great Talmidei Chachamim. So we've got a certain sense of balance over here. We've got the physical monarchy, and then we've got the Talmidei Chachamim next to the physical monarchy, in order to make sure that the king remains on track and that the king does only what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants the king to do. So you need to have a tremendous amount of Talmud scholars around. There were people learning. There was a continual amount of learning. It says that David HaMelech himself was so influenced by the Talmidei Chachamim around him that he would get up at 12 o'clock at night, at midnight, and he had a special instrument above his bed that started to play from the northern winds. When they started strumming the instrument over there, he would wake up. It was like an alarm clock, and he would begin to learn. And that's really the way that it's supposed to be. And then you've got Zvulun as well. Interesting that Zvulun over here, what does Zvulun represent? He represents the idea of physical success. So you've got an interesting balance. You've got the king, you've got the sign of spiritual success, which is the sign of Yisachar. And then you've got Zvulun, who represents the idea of physical success. And then it tells you how many altogether there were there, and then it moves on to the next side. On the south side was Reuven. And then it says, next to him was Shimon. And next to Shimon was the tribe of Gad. Now, it's interesting, because the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says that when you've got good neighbors, that's good for you. Right? Even if somebody's not on the same level as their good neighbor, but if they've got good neighbors, it will make an impact on them, it will make an impression on them, and it will turn them into better people. It's good to live next to good neighbors. It even goes as far as to say it's better to have a good neighbor than to have a brother far away. What's the idea? When you've got a good neighbor, you've got somebody you can rely upon, you've got somebody who's going to be he's going to be a positive role model for you. Hopefully it's going to be a beneficial relationship. On the other hand, says the Gemara, that Reuven and Shimon, they were together, and that wasn't great, because Shimon there are certain flaws inside of Shimon's makeup which come out from time to time, and when they come out in a very destructive way. It's Hashem a little bit later on. We'll get to we'll get to Parshas Korach and we'll see exactly how that works. Shimon, Reuven, they both have their little flaws over there. Gad, which represents the concept of the soldiers, are there to try to help balance them out a little bit. Again, the constellation, it's interesting. And then what have we got? After that, you've got the Leviim. That's an interesting discussion inside of the Gemara, exactly how did they walk in the desert when they were moving along? What was the order? Whether the order was according to the way it appears in the Torah, whether there was a different order. But you've got V'nosa'ol moed machne alevim b'soich hamachnos kasheyachnu ken yisol ish al yodai ledigleim. You've got the Leviim. The Leviim, of course, are in the middle. We'll talk about that in a moment. Dego machne Ephraim l'tzivoisam. On the next side, you've got Ephraim. Yoma v'nosi livnei Ephraim Elishama ben Amihud. And then after that, you've got Menashe. So Ephraim and Menashe are traveling together. That they're a pair. They really are a pair, right? And then it says, who's together with them? Binyamin. Again, a very interesting constellation. Why is that? Because Ephraim, Menashe, and Binyamin all represent the children of Rachel. Rachel only had two children. She had Yosef and she had Binyamin. Ephraim and Menashe, of course, are the children of Yosef. Yosef is more of a bridge between the forefathers and the tribes, rather than being a tribe by himself, which is why Yosef is split up and Ephraim and Menashe become two tribes out of his one tribe. And though that side is comprised of Ephraim, Menashe, and Binyamin, they all come from Rachel, from Rachel, and they all represent, interestingly enough, the concept of Geula, of redemption. Rachel has a tremendous dimension to her. It says that Rachel wasn't buried. She should have been buried in Maras HaMachpelah, in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, right, together with Yaakov. But she wasn't. Yaakov buried her on the way. Everybody here, I'm sure, has been to Beit Lechem, to Keva Rachel, to the tomb of Rachel Imenu. Why is she there? Slap bang in the middle of nowhere. Unfortunately, if you've been there, then you've seen just how isolated it really is. Just a tomb in the middle of nowhere. So when Yaakov was on his deathbed and he wanted to explain to Yosef that he buried Rachel over there on purpose. She needed to be buried over there. Explain the rabbis, explain the sages, that when the Jewish people went out to exile, the first exile after the destruction of the first temple, on their way being taken off to Babylonia, they were taken past the tomb of Rachel Imenu, of Rachel. And over there, they stopped and they cried and they begged and they beseeched that Rachel should intercede with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in order to bring the redemption, in order to bring the exile to an end, even though the exile was just beginning. Explain the rabbis' most incredible thing. Why did God exile the Jewish people? In a certain way, if we can talk about these terms about God, it's as if God was jealous. God was upset with the Jewish people that they'd sold themselves out to idols. It's like they'd committed adultery. They'd done something they shouldn't have done. And God, in his anger, he exiles the Jewish people. And they stop on the way by Rachel Imenu. And by Rachel, what happens over there? Rachel comes before HaKadosh Baruch Hu and she says to God, she says, really, if anybody should have been upset with the way other people were behaving, it was me. I was supposed to get married to Yaakov, and what did I do? I gave the signs to Leah in order for Leah to be able to get married to Yaakov, and now I got married to Yaakov afterwards, and we had to share Yaakov, and it wasn't a simple situation to be in, and yet I didn't say anything. I didn't complain. So she says to God, if I can do it, then you can do it too. You don't have to react so harshly. There's something about the dimension of Rachel, the depth of Rachel Imenu is her ability to stand in front of God and to ask God to deal with the Jewish people with mercy, even though maybe we don't deserve it. That's why it says that the tears of Rachel Imeinu have the most tremendous power up in the spiritual dimensions. And there are prayers where people come and they ask Rachel, they ask your mama Rachel to cry to God, right, for what it is, any kind of a salvation that they're looking for, because Rachel Imeinu has got some kind of a dimension to her which is truly very, very special. All of these, on this side, all of them come from Rachel Imeinu. There's the most tremendous power over here, the power of being able to stand in front of Hashem. And then, in the northern side, it says, Dego machne Dan, tzafoni letzivoisom, v'nosi livnei Dan Achiezer ben Amishadai. And then, who's together with Dan? So we've got Naphtali, we've got Asher, and we've got Naphtali. Again, it's a very interesting constellation. Dan is considered by the sages to have been the weakest of the tribes. Not weakest in strength, but the weakest spiritually from all of the tribes. They were actually one of the strongest tribes, and they were called the Ma'asfim. The tribe of Dan, they used to stay at the back, outside of the clouds of glory, when they traveled through the desert in order to pick up all the stragglers and make sure that they were okay and that they were safe. But the Dan were a very strong, physically very powerful tribe, and yet they were considered to be a somewhat weak tribe spiritually. So they're put together with Asher and Naphtali. Again, Asher, he was the one that represented the olive oil. Olive oil represents the clarity of Torah learning. The olive oil that went into the menorah was something which was so incredibly pure, it had no impurities inside of it whatsoever. Only the very first drops of each olive the very first drops of oil from each olive was allowed to be used in the menorah. All the other olive oil was used for the other things that were required. There was a lot of lighting, aside from the menorah, there was a huge amount of lighting inside of the temple. There were offerings, mincha offerings that were offered up, but only the very purest, the very best oil was used for the menorah. There's a certain sense over here when you've got a somewhat spiritually weak tribe, that the way to balance that out is to put them together with somebody like Asher. Asher represents that clarity of Torah. It's a very beautiful idea, which means that here in the yeshiva, for example, they have in the afternoons, just before the end of the second Seder, where everybody's learning the base of Medrash, so they have the stronger bochrim, the stronger boys learn with the weaker ones. It's a very beautiful idea. It's a very fundamental idea that we've got to be able to give to each other. Then it says on page 736, we're back to the same amount all over again. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu has now counted the Jewish people again, second time around. But the Leviim, if you remember, are still separate from all of this. I once heard a beautiful explanation from Rav Meir Horovitz, the Bostoner Rebbe, the current Bostoner Rebbe. At the time he was the son of the Bostoner Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Kodesh Livrocha. And but he said like this. He says that the very famous moment when Bilam is trying to curse the Jewish people, and he gets brought to see them, and he looks down, and instead of cursing them, he says, "Ma toivo alecha Yaakov mishkan esechi Yisrael." How goodly are your tents? And the Gemara says, what was so goodly about the tents of Israel? What was the big deal? So he said that the tents were configured in such a way that no one opening looked into the opening of somebody else. Which is, there was complete privacy inside of the way that the tents were pitched. So for years and years, to me, it seemed like the most incredible, the most incredible logistic headache to work out how all these tents are supposed to sit. Yeah. And it sounds like you need some kind of a mathematical formula over here to be able to work it all out. And I'm mathematically challenged. So the idea of sitting down and working out how to put up whatever it was, hundreds of thousands of tents that should all be pointing in directions where there are openings. Don't look into anybody else's openings. I don't know. It sounds like the most enormous undertaking. However, Rav Meir Horovitz, the Boston Rebbe, he said like this. He said, it's simple. None of the openings were facing each other because all of the openings in the camp were facing towards the middle. In the middle was the tabernacle, in the middle was the Holy Ark, and every single tent, its opening was pointing towards that. Everyone was, their whole focus was on the middle of the camp. The whole focus was on the idea who gave us.
I mean, he admired the Tzniut so much that he said what he said.
Yeah, the emphasis is like this. When we get to Parshas Balak, then we'll see that he didn't admire the tzniut at all. He didn't admire the modesty at all. He was hoping to curse them. The sages say that from his blessings, you can see how he wanted to curse them.
Oh.
Which means everything is flipped around. What was supposed to be a curse ends up being the way that they're blessed, but you get an idea of what was in his mind. He was hoping to be able to find some kind of a breach in their tzniut, in their modesty, in order to be able to curse them.
Ah.
Unfortunately for him, he couldn't. Fortunately for us, right? He couldn't do that. And he ended up blessing them that how goodly are your tents. What is fascinating is that for those of you who are familiar with davening in the morning, when you step into shul in the morning, that's what you say.
That's what you say.
Ma tovu alecha Yaakov mishkanosecha Yisrael. Isn't it interesting that we choose to start off our daily prayers with a prayer that was put together by one of the greatest enemies of the Jewish people ever? Right? Why would that be? I think the answer is relatively simple. It really is. If Moshe Rabbeinu, if Moses would bless the Jewish people, well, Moses is a little bit subjective, I think. I mean, I hope, right? In the way that he relates to the Jewish people. The truth is that Bilam was also a little bit subjective in the way that he related to the Jewish people, because he hated them. But if Bilam, of all people, ends up having to say, how goodly are your tents of Israel, then you have to imagine that must be true.
It must be true.
When your enemies bless you, then it means that you're doing something right. Right? When you get up in the morning and your eyes are glued shut with sleep and you look absolutely horrible, and your mother says, "Wow, you're so handsome."
Yeah.
Take it with a pinch of salt. What can I tell you? She's your mother, right? She loves you. So maybe she doesn't see you, but when somebody who doesn't like you says how handsome you are, then I guess you can believe what they're saying.
How about your wife?
I'm not getting involved over here in the personal issues of between husbands and wives.
Well, that's true. Sometimes our biggest enemies have been people who, like Maduro. Maduro is the head of Venezuela, who now is contracted to sell. And he claims that maybe he is
might be Jewish. Might be Jewish?
Yeah.
Might be Jewish. Well, what do you?
I'm just curious. Who did you say wrote?
Bilam. Bilam, but he didn't write it. He proclaimed it.
Why only Yaakov? I mean, why did he just use his name in describing the dwelling places?
How goodly are they tents of Yaakov?
Yeah.
Oh, well, maybe it's historical.
As opposed to what? As opposed to Yisrael?
Yeah, I was just curious, just wondering.
Well, it was
possibly
Yaakov's
be-
encampment.
Possibly because there was a limit to how much he was going to be able to bless. Yisrael is the concept of the Jewish nation, whereas Yaakov is the concept of the individuals within the nation. You know what? I'm just thinking out loud, but maybe that's the answer over here, because he's looking at the way that these tents are set up, each individual tent, and he sees that no one's pointing into anybody else. And maybe that's why he chooses to use the more individualistic dimension of Yaakov rather than Yisrael, which is a more like a cohesive unit, one group.
Rabbi, when we think of the Jewish nation, don't we think first of Yaakov?
I don't know. I think it depends. Maybe it depends on what context you're thinking of them in.
Nationalistic.
Nationalistically, the truth is that according to Chazal, if you want to think of the Jewish nation nationalistically, you should really be using the word Yisrael is a more apt description than the word Yaakov. Again, we spoke about this back in Parshat in Sefer Bereshis, but whenever the word Yaakov is used, it's talking about Yaakov, the father of the 12 sons. Whenever the name Yisrael is used, it's talking about Yisrael, the father of the Jewish nation. Which is that when we want to talk about a national dimension of the Jewish people, if you want to speak in Torah terms, then you should really be using the word Yisrael as a much more exact description than the word Yaakov.
But Bilam wasn't thinking that way, right?
No. First of all, I'm not sure that Bilam has the tools to be able to, the sensitivity to be able to differentiate between the two. But even if he does, maybe what I said before, maybe that's what the answer is, that he's looking at the individual tents, which the minute you start looking at the individual dimensions, that's more of a Yaakov dimension. When you're looking at the national dimension, that's more of a Yisrael dimension.
Yeah, he wasn't tuned in.
Here, let's have a look. Next piece over here, chapter 3. The Eila toldos Aaron and Moshe b'yom dibah Hashem es Moshe b'har Sinai. So now apparently we're going to go on a little genealogical journey over here, and we're going to take a look at Moshe and Aaron's family. That's what it sounds like, no?
Yeah.
The Eila toldot Aaron and Moshe, which means what? These are the offspring of Aaron and Moshe. So let's have a look. The Eila shmois b'nei Aaron abachor Nadav. So it says, what does it start with? Of course it's going to start with Aaron, of course. Why? Because Aaron was older than Moshe. So these are the children of Aaron. The eldest child of Aaron is Nadav. Va'avihu Elazar v'Itamar. He's got 4 children. 4 sons. Eile shmois b'nei Aaron ha'kohanim ha'meshuchim Hashem milei yadam l'chayin. These 4 sons have been appointed as Kohanim, which means they're all going to serve as priests. And then it says something which we're not familiar with right now in Vayikra, Vayomos Nadav v'Avihu lifnei Hashem, and Nadav v'Avihu, the 2 eldest children, they died lifnei Hashem, in front of God. Ba'krivam eish zor lifnei Hashem b'Midbar Sinai. Uvanu lo hayu lahem. What did they do? They wanted to bring a special offering to God. They shouldn't have done what they did, but they wanted to do it anyway. According to some of the Mefarshim, they were tremendous tzaddikim. They were incredibly righteous. And they wanted to reach spiritual levels which were beyond their capabilities. That's the idea of an eish zara. Anything to do with fire is spiritual. A foreign fire, an alien fire, is something which has got a negative dimension to it. Right? So some of the Mefarshim, some of the commentaries want to explain that they tried to do too much. They took upon themselves spiritually things that were beyond their capabilities, and that's what caused their death.
Pretty strong punishment.
For sure, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Again, we spoke about it a little bit yesterday, but the idea of when HaKadosh Baruch Hu lays down what is going to be and what's not going to be, there are certain things which have to be done. I'll give you an example. Everyone here has been to the dentist.
Yeah.
I don't know how recently, but we've all been to the dentist. Everyone here has had an x-ray, right? From time to time, everyone's had an x-ray.
Yeah.
When you got to have an x-ray, first of all, what do? They put a little lead bib on you, and then what do the dentist and his assistant do? They step outside.
Yeah.
Right? Because apparently it's okay for you to have the x-ray, That's all right. But it's not okay for them. Of course, we understand because they're doing x-rays every day that the exposure is not healthy. It's not good for them. It's the same in the hospitals as well. They all step outside. It makes a lot of sense, right? But isn't it fascinating that what the x-rays are something which can be incredibly damaging, the rays themselves. Therefore, a person has to look after themselves. What happens if you've got a dentist who decides that he's going to stay with his patients because he has such an empathy with his patients, he doesn't want them to go through this by themselves, and he stays in there holding their hands day after day after day as they have their x-rays done? At some point, he's going to cause himself the most incredible internal damage. He did it all for the right reason. But it's not going to work. Why not? Because these things are damaging. In spiritual terms, these things are also damaging. Right? The Mishkan, the tabernacle, the utensils of the tabernacle, all of these things are incredibly powerful. The Leviim have been given a certain task. The Kohanim have a certain task. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, he has the most amount of spiritual protection to allow him to be able to do what he needs to do. But if you're not the Kohen Gadol, if you're not the high priest, then when you go into a place where you're not allowed to go into, it's like, what's happening? You end up being exposed to spiritual rays which are going to have a detrimental effect on you. It's as simple as that. And that's what happened over here to not of our view. The truth of the matter is that the Netziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Berlin says, the fact that they were killed immediately in the way that they were is an indication of just how righteous they were. Because the more righteous you are, the more God expects from you. The more righteous you are, the more careful you need to be.
Wow. Was it that they weren't warned about this? They did something that was beyond
their capabilities.
Right. And what would have been if they hadn't gone with the alien fire? How would they have complied? Where would they have? What was the proper source of fire for them?
They were not supposed to be dealing with the fire at all. The fire was something which was only applicable to the Kohen Gadol. Only the high priest was allowed to do what they were doing. Which means that what they should have done is that they should have said, we desperately want to do this, but we can't. And by doing that, they would be serving God in the ultimate fashion. Right?
Yeah, you're supposed to get advice.
That you're supposed to get advice. Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things it says over there is that they didn't ask each other whether this was a good idea or not. They both went independently and did exactly the same thing. So I once saw, I don't remember who it was, maybe Rav Yehuda Segel, who said an interesting question. He says, I don't understand. They both want to go and do this thing. And they didn't get advice. They didn't ask each other whether they should or whether they shouldn't have. Okay, what would that have helped? So he says the answer is like this, that by getting advice, Nadav would have said to Avihu, you know what, I want to bring this to the temple. This is what I want to do. And Avihu would have said, I don't know, I don't think you're on the level of being able to do that. Maybe he would have listened, maybe he wouldn't have. And then Avihu would have said the same thing to Nadav, right? And they both of them, maybe they would have heard, maybe they wouldn't have heard, but it would have had an impact, and maybe they wouldn't have done what they were supposed to do. Which means that when a person's got an enormous spiritual desire, a person's got enormous spiritual aspiration, normally I think it makes sense to bounce it off of somebody first, just to make sure that it's okay.
Yeah.
Because sometimes enormous spiritual aspirations if they're not done right, and if they're done too early, they can have the most terrible spiritual ramifications. There's a saying. It says, "Tafasta meruba loy tafasta." What does that mean? So in our language, I guess it's bitten off more than you can chew. Tafasta meruba loy tafasta means that you pick up so much that in the end you drop everything and you don't have anything at all. Right? We've all of that done that on one point or another, whether we do it physically, or whether we've done it in some dimension of our lives where we try to embrace so much, we try to do so much and get so much, that in the end we end up with nothing at all.
It's a big problem. Did Pinchas get advice?
Pinchas came to Moshe. Yeah,
But
we'll
he
get to that
didn't
in Mitzvah
actually-
Hashem.
He didn't exactly advise him. He
He,
said,
he asked him. Here, this is the halacha. So what? Now what? So Moshe says, here, you remember the halacha. You take care of it. Which means that perhaps if Pinchas would have, but we'll get to it in Mitzvah Hashem when we get to that parsha. But perhaps if Pinchas would have done what he did without asking, then maybe that wouldn't have been correct. The fact was that he came first in order to find out what was right and what was wrong.
so Moshe Rabbeinu's statement, qualifies his
Absolutely.
advice. Yeah?
Absolutely. Quite the opposite. Moshe spells it out pretty clearly. He says that it's a saying in the Gemara that whoever read the letter, he should take care of it. Right here, you understood the halacha. Here, so you're the one that has to take care of what needs to be taken care of. They didn't have any children. Right, so he's got two more children. Elazar v'Tamar, Aaron. So far, so good. And then, verse number 5 and 6, and now we've got this whole thing over here with the Levium. Anybody notice something missing over here? Huh? I know it's not a fair question, right? Because it requires thinking. Are you going to?
Are you going to answer?
No, just to think. You don't have to answer. Just.
The answer is no, we didn't.
Okay, that's also an answer. It started off. Verse number 1 started off by saying what? The Eila told us Aaron and Moshe. What are we expecting to hear over here? We're expecting to hear what? That here, this is a genealogy of Aaron. These are his children, and these are the children of Moshe. They don't appear. So Rashi is also concerned about that. Rashi also doesn't understand. So to look at the very first Rashi in the first paragraph. It says, "Ve'ela told us Aaron and Moshe. Ve'enu mas ke'ela b'nei Aaron." The only children that are mentioned over here are the children of Aaron. V'nikra toldois Moshe lifnei shelamdan Torah. It's the most beautiful thing. They're called the children of Moshe because he taught them Torah. Melamed. Shekol ha-melamed es ben chavero Torah male alav hakosav ki'ilu yoldoi. It's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. From here, Chazal learn that anybody who teaches somebody else's children Torah, it's as if he's given birth. They're like his children. It's the most beautiful idea, it really is. You know that the Gemara asks, who are you supposed to honor more? You're supposed to honor your father more. You're supposed to honor your Rebbe more. So we would all say the most obvious answer is what? Surely you need to honor your father more. That's what the Torah says. And yet Chazal teach that you should honor your Rebbe more. Why? Because your father gave you physical life, but your Rebbe gives you spiritual life. And spiritual life is something which exists forever, not just here in the physical world. It's true that without our physical lives, we wouldn't be able to have that spiritual life. But the essence of what we have is our spirituality. And therefore, anyone who gives us that spiritual dimension is somebody whom we have to honor.
Yeah.
It's interesting, the Gemara's got a whole debate as to what's the definition of a Rebbe. How do you define who a Rav is? Right? Do we say that a Rebbe is somebody who's taught you most of what you know? Or do we say, is it less than that? One of the opinions inside of the Gemara is that a person who teaches you 2 halachas has a din of being a Rebbe. That's pretty minimal, right? So what's the idea? Because every mitzvah has the ability to bring you to other mitzvahs, right? The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, mitzvah goreret mitzvah. What does that mean? That each mitzvah, the word grar, it's a fascinating word. It means to tow. A grar in modern Hebrew is a tow truck. Right? Your car breaks down and you have to call up the tow truck and he's going to come and get you. That's called a grar. What on earth does mitzvah goreret mitzvah, what does that mean?
It pulls.
That a mitzvah drags, it tows another mitzvah. What's the idea? That if you do a mitzvah properly, then by definition it's going to bring other mitzvahs along with it. There's nothing you can do about it. Go into any cheder, go into any kindergarten for small children, and invariably, a frum one, right? Invariably you'll see what's called the mitzvah train going around the room. Pictures, right? And you've got the engine at the front, and you've got all the carriages, and each carriage represents another mitzvah that the children have learnt about. And I think the symbolism is absolutely accurate. It really is. You've got one engine, and that one engine is pulling all the other carriages behind it. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter used to say it in Yiddish, but he used to say that one hot engine can pull a sach kalt carriages. It can pull a whole bunch of cold carriages. That's what mitzvah goreret mitzvah means. That each mitzvah is dragging along another mitzvah over here. So somebody teaches you two mitzvahs, that person's given you the ability not just to do those two mitzvahs, but from those two mitzvahs will come all the other mitzvahs that are attached to it. And in effect, all of the mitzvahs can be found inside of that one mitzvah. That one mitzvah will be your engine that's going to pull everything behind it. So that's why it says that if you teach somebody's son Torah, then it's as if you gave birth to that child. And it's as if he's your child, and that's why it says, Ve'ela Torah's Aaron and Moshe, B'yom Dibeh Hashem es Moshe bar Sinai, because the Torah that Moshe received, he taught over not just to Aaron, but he taught it over to Elazar and Itamar as well, as the children of Aaron, and they become like his children. Good.
That's great. Yeah. We all have a father.
Yes, I once heard, my Rabbi once said like this, it's a beautiful idea. He said when he was a kid, he lived in Bnei Brak, and he said that Rav Yitzhak Isaac Sher, Rosh Hashiva Slabodka in Bnei Brak, took a shine to him. He was obviously a very, very, very precocious, very bright kid. And he said one day, he must have been about 7 years old, he said one day Rav Yitzhak Isaac Sher came to him and he said to my kind, he says, my child, he says, we talk about, right, Achenu kol beis Yisrael. The truth is we said in davening twice a week, when there's Kriyas HaTorah, when we read from the Torah Monday and Thursday, so after we recite the Yiratzons, at the end it says, Achenu kol beis Yisrael, our brothers Israel, we're all brothers. Achenu kol beis Yisrael. So he said to my Rebbe, he said, tell me, he says, why do we use that phrase, Achenu kol beis Yisrael? Why of all things are we described as being brothers? So he said he tried all different kinds of explanations. He wasn't getting anywhere. It wasn't working. Like this and like that, and like the other. So finally, Rav Yitzchak Isaac Sher looked at him and he says, no. He says, because we all have the same Father. Avinu Sheba Shamayim, our Father in the heavens. He's the Father of everybody, and that makes us. If he's everybody's Father, that makes us all brothers.
Yeah.
I guess that.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a very beautiful idea, it really is. That's who we are. We all have a Father, and we can all rely on that Father, and He can take care of us. And in the meantime, that Father wants us to learn Torah, so that's what we try to do, right?